And so what we're seeing, to sum it up, is just chaos,
Yeah.
misinformation, lots of fear. We know that immigration enforcement is happening in our communities. And so what we want to do is attempt to correct that information, to share Know Your Rights with our community, to protect them when we can, and to continue doing our work as legal services providers.
Hello and welcome again to Chino Y Chicano. I'm Enrique Cerna. Coming up, a conversation with Malou Chavez. She's the executive director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. We're going to be talking about the impact of the Trump administration's crackdown on the undocumented. But before we get to that conversation, I want to talk a bit about a television spot I saw the other night. It was a spot that was produced by the Department of Homeland Security, and it features the new secretary, Kristi Noem. She used to be the governor of South Dakota and now part of the Trump administration. Here's a bit of audio from that spot.
I'm Kristi Noem, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security. Thank you, President Donald J. Trump, for securing our border, for deporting criminal illegal immigrants, and for putting America first.
Now, according to an article in Rolling Stone, that spot is part of a big budget media campaign. This from Rolling Stone. The Department of Homeland Security has budgeted up to $200 million to run anti-immigrant ads in the United States and overseas that repeatedly thank President Donald Trump for leading an immigration crackdown. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says the ads were Trump's idea and that during the administration's transition to power, the president asked her to star in the ads and to thank him for closing the border. Now, several things to note here. Trump is a media guy, a TV guy, so this type of campaign really isn't all that unusual. It's not unusual that him for asking something like this. I'm not sure if other administrations have produced media campaigns. I'm sure they have, but I don't know that they have also included asking or thanking the president of the United States in office at that time. Now, Secretary Noem is reported to have told a conservative political action group that Trump said to her, "We're not going to let the media tell this story because the media will never tell the truth. We're going to run a marketing campaign to make sure the American people know the truth of what you're doing." And Noem added that the president told her, "I want you in the ads, I want your face in the ads, and I want that first ad for you to thank me. I want you to thank me for closing the border." Well, the border is not closed, and this big budget campaign is happening at a time when the Trump administration is cutting thousands of jobs in the federal government and hundreds of high-level jobs in the Department of Homeland Security. And the Department of Homeland Security, by the way, oversees a number of other agencies, which include FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They're all part of the Department of Homeland Security, and they're all getting some big cuts. Thought this was kind of interesting, so I thought I'd share this with you. All right, here now is my conversation with Malou Chavez, Executive Director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Give me a sense of what you're seeing and feeling and what the community is feeling right now.
Well, that's a heavy question. I think that there's been both for the impacted client communities that we work with, the immigrant communities here in Washington State. All of our clients come to Northwest Immigrant Rights Project either because they have a potential case for immigration protection, they're facing deportation, or a family member or a loved one is impacted. We work with people who are detained in one of the largest immigration detention centers in Tacoma. We also work with people who come from different walks of life, survivors of violence, people from the LGBTQI plus community, youth who came unaccompanied, people who are already in immigration status, lawful immigration status, but are at risk of losing it. And so with the new federal administration, we are experiencing a very targeted We knew that it was coming. We knew that there were threats. But now the actions are, as we are seeing them, it's just too much for the community. Constant executive orders, memorandum, rescissions of guidance that in the past was favorable for prosecutorial discretion. Now those are being lifted. Our work as advocates has also been impacted. We have to, get up to speed and learn and be able to protect our communities and give them the correct advice and information. And so our work is through direct legal services, community education, and then systems change. Part of that includes impact litigation, where we end up suing the government to ensure that the rights of immigrants are protected and advanced. And so what we're seeing, to sum it up, is just chaos,
Yeah.
misinformation, lots of fear. We know that immigration enforcement is happening in our communities. And so what we want to do is um, at, attempt to correct that information, to share Know Your Rights with our community, to protect them when we can, and to continue doing our work as legal services providers, the day-to-day work.
Yeah, the chaos I can imagine is just at such a high level because even for the public in trying to understand what's going on, there seems to be something changing every day and not knowing what direction it's going through. Probably the most of your clients, the people you work with are Latino, but not everyone, right?
No, not everyone. The majority are Spanish speaking from different countries in Latin America, but we serve clients from over 160 countries, people who come from countries speaking collectively more than 60 languages. In our team, we have our staff speaks more than 25 languages collectively. And so while the Latino Spanish speaking community is prominent. It is not the only community that Northwest Immigrant Rights Project serves.
Do you have any people from Ukraine or Eastern Europe?
Working or serving?
I guess serving or clients or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, we definitely serve people from Ukraine and Eastern Europe. That's
Yeah.
right.
I wanted to point that out because it's not, I think when you talk about mass deportations and immigration crackdown, it tends to be always centered around talking about people from Mexico or Central America. Let's talk about what you are hearing in the community daily.
Yeah. Well, our team in Tacoma in particular, are just getting emails and calls from loved ones of people who have been apprehended and detained and now are in Tacoma or are going to be put on a flight to be deported. Our team in our four different offices, Seattle, Granger, Wenatchee, and Tacoma, are working with survivors of violence to get their U visas filed, to get their self petitions filed. Youth, right now, one thing we recently learned last week is that there was a stop work order to continue doing our work of deportation defense of youth and children who had been come to the U.S. unaccompanied. And 3 days later, that stop work order was canceled. And so
What does that mean, stop work order?
they told us to essentially shut down all of our work related to defending immigrant youth and children. And even though we have a federal funding to do this work, um, and we had to kind of pivot. And fortunately, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, as an organization, we have been doing this work for 40 years. Our board has been amazing at ensuring that we have reserves and so that we can step up and be able to continue this work a little bit, right, for the time being until we find out what would happen. But so we continue the work. Nothing was impacted necessarily, but there's no way that we are able to support this community without the funding that we receive. And so when we learned the stop work order, that announcement just meant that we couldn't bill for the work we were doing.
Mhm.
And so we wouldn't get paid. And thankfully that was canceled and we're back to resuming services, back to what we do.
And then that money was coming from where? Like the Department of Justice or where?
No, the Office of Refugee Resettlement,
Okay.
through one of our funders who is Acacia, and they contract with us to be able to provide this work. And there are over nearly 100 services providers in the country. So more than 26,000 youth were impacted by this stop work order. So it's not just NERP, it's not just Washington State, right? It was going to be a lot of people impacting.
Yeah.
And
So
the staff,
for the and so those young people basically were just frozen in time, right? As far as our cases are concerned.
essentially at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, we have the benefit that we're able to continue doing the work for the time being, short time. But other organizations just couldn't continue, right? They need that funding to be able to serve. And
Yeah.
so do we. So do we. Long term, we need it. Immediate for those 3 days, it wasn't impacted.
So like others in the federal government or depending on grants and other institutions, Northwest Immigrant Rights is facing the same thing.
That's right. Yeah, we serve, that's what we do. We serve the immigrant community, and we have about, 20% of our budget, our revenue is federal funding.
What are you telling the people in the community? Because for one thing, you've got to be just fearful. But the other thing is that you don't know whether the information you're receiving is accurate or not. So what's the message to them that your organization is giving?
Well, we know that there's a lot of information, and some of it the attempt is to create volumes of information, which causes the chaos
Yeah.
and potential
Flooding the zone, they call it.
flooding
Yeah.
the zone, yeah,
Yeah.
potential misinformation. And just because something is announced doesn't mean there's a change, right? An executive order will be challenged potentially. A change in practice could be challenged, right? And so just to stay informed, to follow organizations like ours or others who provide this correct information. Everyone should know our rights. What are your rights when interacting with law enforcement, with immigration enforcement, in different scenarios at home, in the workplace, in your car, walking in a public area? And so just knowing your rights has been important. We know that it works. Some of our community members have been able to stop ICE from entering their homes, and ICE had to leave, right? Because they didn't have a valid judicial warrant, and the people knew their rights. And so we know that it works. And so empowering with knowledge and awareness and correct information has been key to combat that fear and combat that chaos that we are experiencing.
So walk me through this. Then ICE shows up at my home. What do I do?
Yeah, so that is an important information that we all should know. So first, can they come in? No, they can't come in. It's a private dwelling, right? You have to ask if they have a judicial warrant. And if they show you a document, is it a judicial warrant or is it an administrative warrant? Is it signed by a judge? Does it have the date of validity? Does it include the address, the name of the person that they're looking for, what areas or what person they want to search? And it's very important that we think about ICE having access either through a judicial warrant or consent. If we say, sure, come in, that gives ICE permission to enter and essentially do what they want to do, search, whatever, if you're giving them permission. But if you're not giving them permission, they cannot enter. Sometimes they still enter without a judicial warrant, right? And sometimes they violate rights. And it's important that we think about what might be ways that we protect ourselves and our homes in order to be not just protecting ourselves, but our community, right? And our loved ones who might be at home with us.
So if I have a phone
Yeah.
and they suddenly say, well, Okay, they come to the door and I say, no, you can't come in. And then they come in.
Mhm.
I'm not giving them consent. And then I say, do you have a judicial warrant? And they still don't respond to me. Um, from the moment that they show up there, can I roll some video to protect myself?
Yes, you can certainly say, I am using my phone to record you. You have to announce that you're recording it. And they might say, no, don't do it. And you have the right to record if you're announcing it. But if you have to give them that notice. And you can tell them, I don't give you permission to be in my house. Please leave. If they don't have a judicial warrant, you have to ask, I mean, you can ask them to leave, unless you give them permission, right? And that's what we're trying to share with community members, that they either have judicial warrants or they have consent. And if you're not consenting, um, even if they ask you questions, remembering your rights to remain silent, to not incriminate yourself, to not answer questions without consulting with an attorney first.
And do they have to show you that judicial warrant that says judicial warrant on it?
Yeah, it says the district court that signed the judicial warrant. It says the name of the judge. It has a date, very specifically lists what area they can search or what person they're looking for. So it has to be very specific.
So I've seen some videos where I see some of the law enforcement. Of course, some of them identify themselves as ICE, others don't, and some just say police on them. Uh, some of them are they're quite belligerent with people. And
Mhm.
how do you handle yourself in a situation like that?
Yeah, and we know that this could happen, right? So remembering the right to remain silent, right? And also saying it. It can be in whatever language the person speaks. No voy a contestar tus preguntas antes de hablar con un abogado. I'm not going to answer your questions before speaking to an attorney. Um, Tengo el derecho de permanecer callado. I have the right to remain silent. And just repeating it, I have the right to remain silent. I want to speak to an attorney. And also knowing that if you are being questioned and you're still saying, I have the right to remain silent. I invoke my right to remain silent. You can also ask, am I free to leave? Right? I don't want to answer any questions. I want to talk to a lawyer. Am I free to leave? And they should let you go. But we also know that there are violations, and if that happens, then it could be used against the arrest and or against the evidence that they collect because it was unlawfully obtained. And so the case in immigration proceedings could be suppressed and closed so that the person is no longer in deportation proceedings. But there needs to be some sort of um, recording, not visual, but like jot down information about the encounter, what happened. And someone else, there might be a witness or there might be recording, actual visual recording.
Let's say I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden I get rolled up upon by ICE
Mhm.
and they question me about show me your ID. Uh, what do I do? I'm a
Yeah,
brown guy on the street, so they.
yeah. We know that interactions happen very quickly, right? Rapidly. And they even might know your name and might call you and you turn around, they know it's you. And so, but that doesn't mean that they got you, right? Just because you turn around when they call somebody's name. I think the same thing applies. Before you give your name or answering any questions, you can ask, am I free to leave? If they say yes, just leave respectfully, and say, I don't want to answer any questions. Um, if they say no, you are not free to leave, then that's when you exercise your right to remain silent,
Do
right?
they have to identify themselves?
You do want to ask, are you the police? Are you highway patrol? Are you immigration? Am I being stopped? Why am I being stopped? They do have to identify themselves,
And do
but
they
we
have to
know
explain why they're stopping you?
typically they don't have to, but they might, right? In some instances they won't. The reason why it's important to ask who they are is because we know that this administration is deputizing other federal agencies to do this work, like DEA and FBI, for example, right? And they're not typically immigration enforcement. And so we want to know who is apprehending or causing this interaction.
So, and again, in a situation like that too, can I pull my phone out and start and then say, I'm going to record this interaction?
Yes, so that can happen. Yes, there are many um, advisors from different organizations that say that that is allowed as long as you inform them of what you're doing.
And then what if I say, okay, hey, I'm an American citizen, and that, you know, what's up with this?
Yeah, so I think two things for that. One, a person who is not impacted by the immigration system, that's an easy thing to say, right? Hey, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Leave me alone. I'm a US citizen. They might not believe you, right? And we know of instances where US citizens have been detained, apprehended by ICE. In fact, we filed a lawsuit not years ago, right? But we know of instances. We also know that that will be an easy way to end the conversation. But remembering that whether you are a US citizen or not, you have those rights. You still can invoke the right to remain silent. You still can say, I'm not going to show you, I'm not going to answer any questions. Show me your documentation, or where were you born? I'm not going to answer any questions. And I think that's in solidarity with community members who are impacted by the immigration system. So you can decide, you don't want to deal with it, leave me alone. I'm a US citizen. Or you can decide, I'm going to invoke my rights and prove you that you're just stopping me because I'm brown, or you're stopping me because I have an accent when I speak,
Right.
right?
Yeah. So I wanted to go through that just because I want to
Yeah.
know, for one thing, and also as an American citizen, I was born here. Um, I would imagine that I'm a dark-skinned guy. And I may fit whatever they're looking for, and they might try to arrest me or detain me. Have you had reports of American citizens being detained or questioned?
We had a lawsuit about one of our community members who is a citizen of the US, and he was unlawfully detained as a citizen and sent to the Tacoma Detention Center for 7 days. And now in 2021, we reached a settlement. So he was detained by immigration authorities in 2019. So not that long ago, right?
No, not that
And
long
the
ago.
current administration was not present at the time, but it happens. And so we need to be alert.
I would imagine that you're working with other community groups that are involved in serving the different communities, Spanish-speaking communities, as well as others that you mentioned, all the different languages that are spoken.
Mhm.
Spoken. What's going on there as far as how the people are working together and dealing with this?
The last round of this administration, there was a lot of movement around allyship and partnerships and coming together. And Washington has one of the strongest immigrant rights network, the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, that has come together and is in many sense a convener of immigrant rights and immigrant justice organizations and individuals. So we're partnering with WISN, we're partnering with other services providers to do this sharing of information, the Know Your Rights, the training. Today we had a training for services providers. How do you work with clients who are impacted? What do you tell your clients? How can you plan, right? Part of it is not just living in fear, but it's also how can you be proactive and plan for a potential family separation, right?
Mm,
Do you have a power of attorney who's going to take care of your minor children? Do you have someone you can trust to pick up your children from school? And so there's a lot of coordination. We know that immigrant communities are impacted, but this is impacting everyone, all people, regardless of citizenship status. We know that there's, efforts around denying the existence of gender identities or
Mm.
DEI or uh, people's identities attacked in so many ways. Survivors of violence, youth are going to be targeted by immigration enforcement. So there's a lot of different things happening, and we need to partner. How do we support our trans LGBTQ community, right? How do we support um, communities who are uh, demanding or enforcing the rights of our civil rights or others?
Getting messaging out there. Obviously, these workshops and meeting with community groups. But so Jaime Mendez, who is does Se Habla Media, I know he's very active in all of this. Are you working with someone like Jaime and others that are, Spanish speaking media to inform folks?
So I've participated in some of the convenings that Jaime Sabla Media have put together. And I know that many of our services providers are Spanish speaking, and some of our presentations are in Spanish or interpreted into other languages. And I think it is important to be able to share this information. We also work with, we've been approached by media outside of the US,
Oh,
in
really?
Guatemala and Mexico, to inform people of their rights and to inform about what is happening in the language that they speak. Because um, I think that often we think of being isolated in our community or in our state or country, but this is impacting everyone globally, and there's fear all around the world just because of what they're seeing here in the US.
Yeah, and in many of in Mexico and Central America, I mean, there are indigenous groups that don't, I mean, some speak Spanish, some have their own dialects.
That's right.
So there's communication that you have to deal with there. Um, as you look at the challenge of all of this, I guess, what what do you need from community? I
Thanks.
mean, yeah.
I think we are seeing it. We are one thing that keeps gives me hope besides our clients who are not giving up, and so we're not going to give up, and we're going to be there for them. But what's also giving me hope is this we're in this together message that our community has, for many years been present and shows up. And, 2 weekends ago, there was a fundraiser for groups like NERP and others who are serving the immigrant community through I think more than 160 different businesses fundraised money. And so that was amazing. We get messages, keep doing this work. Your work is valuable. Um, Calling representatives, there was a very harmful legislation that passed in Congress, the Lake and Riley Act, that calls for mandatory detention of certain immigrants who commit certain offenses or get convicted of certain offenses. And that has been devastating because it's changing the Immigration and Naturalization Act. It's actually changing the law. And that has been impactful, but many of our community members called to say, vote no on this. And it still passed, right? It still got voted and the president signed it. But engaging in sharing of information, showing up, of course, financial donations are helpful. Um, but I think more than anything is that being there, understanding and wanting to help has been really important for our advocates and our client communities to know that they're not alone, that there's a larger community behind, and that people understand the contributions of immigrants, right? People know how valuable they are to the culture, to the economy, to to everyone's livelihood. So just knowing that they're there.
The birthright issue, Washington State immediately sued. So far, they have managed to thwart the efforts of the administration on that issue. Do you think that there's still an opportunity to secure, I guess, a win there?
I think so. I also want to note that because of the work that Northwest Immigrant Rights Project does through our legal services, we actually also filed a lawsuit and it was combined with the state of Washington. And the lawsuit was on behalf of three mothers who are impacted or who would be impacted by this change in law of birthright citizenship, change in the Constitution.
Mm.
um, and I think it makes the case stronger because then there are impacted people, right? And so combining the state's lawsuit with NERP's lawsuit of impacted people, I think that there is going to be a win. However, as it moves towards the Supreme Court, we don't know what that might be like, right? But we still know that it requires a congressional change, right? And that executive orders don't change the law. Executive orders don't change the Constitution. And the challenges that we are seeing to these very wrong orders and guidance that the federal administration is putting out there is also hopeful. And I think that perhaps it was a distraction because everyone was all upset about how
Yeah.
can you do this the very first day, birthright to citizenship. And it was a distraction because everything else came, right? And I think that everyone's trying to figure out, okay, what do we focus on? What do we do? Um, what can we challenge first? And that is going to be important to know who's doing what. At NERP, we have the work that we do. We're able to identify trends and identify who's impacted and how we move forward with litigation and challenges.
You have been with NERP for how long?
Over 17 years.
And then you became executive director. Was it in the fall?
It was June 2024.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
And Jorge Baron, who had been in that position, I think, for about 17 years,
that's
and
right.
now he's a King County Council member.
That's
So
right.
you're not new to the work, but taking over as executive director, wow. I mean, talk about taking it over at a time of just tremendous unpredictability.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel very fortunate that I got an opportunity to work with Jorge Baron, our former executive director. To me, he'll always be our executive director. Um, I was um, asked to be NERP's first deputy director, and I served in that role for 5 years, working closely with Jorge. And I got to see a lot of what an executive director does, the responsibility that it comes with, having a huge bird's eye view of the organization, the external partnerships, the advocacy that needs to happen, and more than anything, continuing that direct contact with the clients and our client communities. And, I started as an intern
Mm.
while I was in law student and have held different roles in the organization. We are a unionized organization. At some point, I was union president, and now here I am negotiating our contract as the executive director. And it's just been amazing to be in this role when I know that there's a lot of challenges ahead and currently for our client communities, for our team, for our partners. But we have amazing partnerships and we have an amazing team. And we're here to do the work, right? I think that that makes a difference, remembering why we do the work.
Is this the greatest challenge of our time in this country?
It's been challenging for sure.
Yeah. How do you get through it? I mean, with everything changing daily and and chaotically unpredictable and many times not making a heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you tell your staff to stick with it, and how does everybody stick with this?
Yeah, we have to remember why we do this work, why we're here. Remember to take care of ourselves. Our wellness is going to be very important, our mental health. We cannot let this big monster, to say the least, take over our livelihoods and take over our work and operate out of fear or out of a mindset of scarcity, right? We have to operate out of abundance, out of wellness, out of love for our communities and the work that we do. Um, and we are in a very amazing situation, strong as an organization because our board thought about how we protect NERP to be able to do this work long term. And so we have healthy reserves and we have amazing partners, amazing funders, where we are impacted, but not right away, right? There's a cushion, and that gives me an ability to talk with our team and say, look, we're going to notify and communicate as soon as we learn things, but we cannot operate under fear. And we also have to be nimble about what our work looks like in the future. We know that mass deportation and expanding detention is a key goal of this administration. How would our work look like 6 months, a year, 2 years from now? There's no way to tell, but we know what we do, and what we do best is that legal services, day-to-day work with our communities.
Malou Chavez, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate it. And best of luck, because this is definitely some challenging times.
Thank you, Enrique. Really nice to see you again. And I know that we'll continue this conversation.
Oh, we will. We will.
The Chino Y Chicano podcast is available on your favorite podcast provider.
You can watch the video version on YouTube, and Converge Media, a leading producer of culturally relevant content in the Pacific Northwest. We'll talk more later.